Welcome to Murfreesboro Storytellers. Our program today is originating from the front porch of the President's home on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University, 2215 Middle Tennessee Boulevard. And we have two guests today that are longtime good friends and graduates of MTSU. Right. And that's John Ellington and Ann Ellington Wagner, brother and sister.
Right.
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And son and daughter of the late Buford Ellington, governor of the state of Tennessee. It's just a delight to see you, and we want to learn what's been going on in your lives over the years, and tell us about the experience of being children of a governor and living in the governor's residence for a time. And I guess you lived in the residence more than John did. Was he already gone from home at that time?
Yes, he was in the service at that time, okay. And he created a lot of animosity for me because he was not in all of the circuits that I was in. But it was an interesting period of time for both of us. And when he would get a leave and get into town, we'd go over to our favorite restaurant, Nevills, and have dinner and listen to Sonny play on the piano, and made very special times because we didn't get to see each other very much during those years.
I understand your father served two different times in the state legislature, 1959 to 1963, right. And then 67 to 71. They called it leapfrog government at that time.
Yes, because Dad was Frank Clement's campaign manager, right. And then when the legislature voted from a 2-year term to a 4-year term, but you couldn't succeed yourself, since then Frank could not run. So they wanted to keep the line going, and so Dad ran and won. Frank ran again and won, and Dad ran again and won. But then Frank was killed in a car wreck and could not run again.
Quite a strong affiliation. John, what's your recollection of having your father as a governor?
Not much, but I wasn't here.
What were you doing during that period of time?
Well, the first time he ran, as Ann pointed out, I was in the Army. And then the second time that he ran, I was with Delta Airlines.
Okay.
So I came in on occasions and had dinner with the family and this kind of stuff. And as Ann pointed out, after all that, we would slip off and go over to Nero's and have a nice evening. But we did that. But some of the interesting part that I felt was interesting, but when I got to Fort Rooker, Alabama, as it turned out, the commanding officer down there was also a company commander in the Army when Frank Clement was in the Army, and also when Joe Carr was in the Army.
What a coincidence.
Former Secretary of State. And he tells a story about when the first day that they were in the Army, and back then they wore these spats around the legs, you know, and the part of just the Army get-up. So anyway, Joe Carr was having difficulty marching in this situation, and Frank, the company commander, looked at him, and he had his spats on backwards, and they were hooking. Every time he hooked, he'd fall off, you know. So he loved to tell that story. But he was still in the Army when I got there, and would arrange for me to come up and see the family in special times, such as the inauguration. And so I got to come up for that and occasionally, but the Army was booming at the time, and it was just a recovery from Korea, and so we were still mopping up that mess. So,
did I understand you almost had to have some identification to be able to get into the residence and did not know you sometimes?
That could be the truth. Well, I tell you that it was truth. At one time I walked up there, and this highway patrolman happened to be there, and he didn't know me from Adams off, and nor did I know him. I just pulled up the car and got out and started walking in, and he put a stop to that right quick. But Mother happened to be around close, and she managed to get that undone.
But you have to remember, John, there was not a fence or a gate around the property
during
the first.
So you could actually drive up to the
right,
house.
And that fence was not put in until Winfield Dunn became governor, and that was done at Dad's suggestion to him because times were changing and protection for the family. You know, and I really think, and John will back me up on this, that the average person doesn't have a clue what the family members of the governor go through or put through experience. And until you can sit down and walk in their shoes, you know, it's not all fun and games.
I'm sure. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the program, to sort of give us a feel for being the children of the sitting governor. Let's go to MTSU first, though.
Okay.
And both graduates of Middle Tennessee State University.
Yeah.
John, your degree?
Industrial arts,
Okay.
and in the spring of '56 I graduated.
Did you learn to fly while a student at MTSU?
I did. Miller Lanier had
Yes.
just opened up the new airport out at the where the airport is
When
today.
you moved from the campus out to
And
231.
right at the campus airport, and it was just closing when I got here and moved out. So, but yes, I learned to fly while I was here, and first couple of years, and then after that, I worked out there as an instructor for Miller, and then got out of the Army and went that way. So, anyway, yeah, I had all that. A nice little story. I had all my license. I had a commercial license in the airplane. I had an instructor's rating in the airplane. I had an instrument rating in the airplane. And I went in the Army. And I first went to Fort Chaffee, Arkansas to get indoctrinated. And so I said, well, you know, this will be a piece of cake. I'll go in here and I'll fly the Army observation planes for them. You know, they need somebody to do that. So I got in there and took all the aptitude tests and all this kind of stuff. And after all was said and done, the people in charge of determining what area of the Army you should be in determined, he said, young man, you are not pilot material. And I said, okay, where we go from here?
How'd you overcome that?
Then he said, but we do have an opening in the military maintenance department, in the aviation maintenance.
Okay.
And I said, okay, I'll take that. And so, not that I had any choice, but having recovered from that after I got out of the Army, it's a nice story I tell to some of the people, and some people would agree with them. I wasn't the right material.
I'm sure of that. And tell us about your MTSU experience.
Well, actually, during that time when I graduated from high school, everybody around us was determining where I should go to school.
I bet.
I was the daughter of a sitting governor, and therefore I should go to Vanderbilt, or I should go to UT, or I should go somewhere else, you know. And I was corresponding with John and telling him what was going on, and I wanted to be far enough away from Nashville that I could kind of create my own world, but yet I wanted to be close enough to get back in to help Mom when she needed me.
Good thinking.
And he happened to come in one weekend, and we were talking about it. So he says, come on. So we got in the car and came over here, and I registered for to attend MTSU, and so many of the faculty that was there then were there when John was there. So I felt like I was moving with friendly people,
Sure.
you know. And so I ended up in Rutledge Hall with Mrs. Alma Bass,
Okay.
and my high school best friend in Nashville also registered down here, and they were able to put the two of us together, which was a comfort. And from then on, it was kind of, you know, that I have a degree in fine arts, and after my student teaching, I realized that I was not going to be a teacher. I had to get out. I'm not an in-room place. And so from there, I started painting on my own and had a number of one-man shows. I've got paintings in chalets in Denver, Colorado, and wherever, all the way to Florida. So.
Wonderful.
And I'll be at the Green Hills Public Library the month of December with some of my artwork.
Need to
Yeah.
come by then. Where did you attend high school?
At Hillsborough High
Hillsborough
School
High
in
in
Nashville.
Nashville.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
And also right in there, John, pardon me for interrupting.
No,
but
fine.
somewhere in that area, in that year range, because when I came here, it was Middle Tennessee State Teachers College.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
And somewhere in there, and I don't think your certificate says Teachers College on it. I'm not
Well,
sure.
yeah, may not. Later, it became Middle Tennessee State College.
State College.
Yeah.
that's
And then
right.
ultimately Middle Tennessee
Yeah,
State
right.
University,
Exactly.
July 1, 1967, I believe.
But it happened shortly after I left,
Yeah.
and maybe before she got off somewhere. Maybe she was here when it happened.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And let's talk about some of your experiences as daughter of a governor, as a matter of fact. Not a governor, but the governor, Buford Ellington, who did so many wonderful things for the state of Tennessee.
Yes, actually, and another alum, Randy Woods,
yes.
with Dot Records, a good friend of John's. They were very instrumental in a lot of my experiences, because when I went to LA for my screen test, I stayed with Randy and Lois, and then got some very valuable suggestions, and so I came back home and didn't do the screen test.
Used to know their address. I went out there one time with a group from MTSU, thought I would visit Randy Wood, but he was sleeping because he'd been up all night doing a recording session.
Yes, absolutely. A very busy man, that is for sure. But it gave me an opportunity to meet people that I never in my lifetime would do it. And I mentioned to you about my experience with President Harry Truman.
Oh yes, tell us about that.
Governor Clement was in office at that time, and I was in the 7th grade, and Clement is a couple of years younger than I am, but anyway, the president was in town, and I've forgotten what the purpose of his visit was, but the Clements had invited Mom and Dad to have dinner with him, and Bob wanted to have me up there. So we get up there, and during the conversation right before dinner, they were cooking steaks that night.
Oh boy.
And so we were upstairs in the family living room, and there's an upright small piano up there, and President Truman decided to sit down and play the Missouri Waltz, as usual. And he was up there playing everything. Well, I had just started piano lessons, so now he's the musician in the family, not me. And so after they called us down for dinner, Bob and I walked out in the hallway, and President Truman came and walked between us. And so he turned around and he said, "Well, Ann, what did you think of my playing?" And I said, "President Truman, I think you need to take piano lessons like I'm taking right now."
Did you really?
Well, my mom and dad were right behind us. And when we got home, you can imagine, my mom almost melted into the carpet that I should say such a thing. He got the biggest laugh out in the world out of it. He was still laughing when he got on the plane to go back, but I was being honest, naive but honest.
That's a great story.
But we did hear from them a couple of weeks later, and he mentioned, that he might think about taking piano lessons.
And was Mrs. Truman with him on the visit?
No, she was not.
Okay.
No, she was not. Yeah.
I understand, going back to MTSU, you found a husband at MTSU,
I did indeed.
Tell us about Tim.
Well, that was my senior year, and this transfer from the University of New Mexico, and a Lobo basketball player from Logansport, Indiana, happened to get a scholarship here to play basketball. And at that time I was seeing someone else, but I had come in for student teaching update and whatever, and we decided that since my parents were out of town, my grandmother was staying at my house, that we just might have a little party. Well, as it turned out, make a long story short, nobody came but him, because he's the only one that had a car at that time, and he told them all that I had canceled the party. So he came on his own, and we had our first date in December and married the following November.
Very good. And been married for how many years?
53 next month.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations.
Yes.
The first time I knew of you, I knew who you were at MTSU, you were working in the guidance and counseling office of Dr. Jim Martin.
Yes, absolutely. And funny thing is that he and I had the same birthday, so I think it was meant to be. And our daughter is named Jennifer, and his daughter was named Jennifer. But yes, that was a terrific experience. He was a very insightful gentleman, and I am very privileged to have spent time with him.
That was pretty well the day before computers, wasn't it?
Oh gosh, yes.
The typewriters.
Yes.
So one of the fun stories about Jim Martin, so attractive young lady as you still are, it was 2 years before he knew you couldn't type.
Right. You're right.
Oh, I'm sure that was true or not.
It was, you know, like
Hunt and
this.
peck, I
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
absolutely.
But-
Yeah.
but you got
he was marvelous,
Yeah.
and
Long-time good
he
friend,
was
I thought the world of
a
him.
soulmate, because there were times when situations would get difficult, and he could see them, and we would have long chats.
I
So
bet.
he was a big help during that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, tell us about your experiences flying Delta Airlines in particular. You retired from there.
Yeah, excuse me. I went with Delta in 1962,
Okay.
and so I hit it just at a great time for a pilot and a pilot's progression through a career, because we were just getting jet airplanes, and Delta had 5 jets at the time, and
5 total?
5 total, and they had about over 100 airplanes, but they were all piston airplanes,
Sure.
you know, of various and sundry sorts. So I got to get in on the ground floor of the jet age, and by the time the first year rolled around, I was already moving into jet engine. I was a flight engineer on the jets. So anyway, that worked out, and then later on I don't know, 3 or 4 years later, I was asked to go into the training department to be an instructor in training department, and I didn't know anything about flying jets. I had been an engineer on jet, but that didn't mean I knew how to fly one. So we were getting DC-9s, and that was 1966. And so I'll never forget it as long as I live. The vice president of flight operations called, and I was, he knew that I was off, because you see the schedules on everybody's show. But anyway, he said, "Need you to come over here, and I need to talk to you." Usually that meant that you were about to get fired. And so I went over there, and he says, "Ellington," he says, "you going into the training department, and you're going to be an instructor on DC-9s. We're getting new DC-9s, and you're going to be an instructor on DC-9. And I said, "Well, Captain," I says, I've never flown a jet." And he says, "I didn't ask you if you'd ever flown a jet. As a matter of fact, I didn't ask you any questions at all. I was just telling you what the deal was."
And you
So
took the deal, no doubt.
I sort of learned how to be a captain that day. You know, so anyway, that was the end of co-pilot days and engineer days, and all of a sudden I was a captain on a jet airplane, and got to go out to the factory and go through the factory training department out there and work with the test pilots and all that. And it just worked out great. And so my entire career at Delta was those kinds of things. And the last 5 years I was with Delta, I was, let's see, that'd be 89. Starting in 89, we got, Delta had purchased MD-11s, which were a long-range, heavy-hauling machine. And we were operating between Portland, Oregon, and Taipei and Bangkok.
Okay.
And so I got to get in on the ground floor on that one, and that's where I stayed until I retired.
And did you fly troops for the Gulf War?
Yes,
Transport?
the first Gulf War, the Department of Defense had called Delta Airlines and said they needed some lift, some extra lift. They just couldn't do all that they wanted to do in getting troops over, because Iraq had just invaded Kuwait. And so they were scratching up and trying to get airplanes and pilots. So Delta loaned me to the Army, not the Army, the Air Force, during that period of time to haul troops. Delta would bring troops into Atlanta from all over the United States, and then they'd put them on the larger airplanes, and away we'd go over to Kuwait with the thing. So I got to do that for quite a while, and it was a wonderful experience. And if you never wanted a flag on your chest, you certainly wear it after that, because that's it's really tweaks your patriotic nerves.
I can imagine. Wonderful service.
Yeah.
And I understand that you became friends with Elvis Presley. Tell us about that experience.
I'll tell you a little bit.
All right. You want to tell?
You want me to leave?
No, it's
All
quite
you
all
can say. Okay.
No, the Memphis delegation to the legislature wanted Dad to give him a colonelship that was so popular back during those times, and to acknowledge what he had done for the recording industry in Tennessee, particularly Nashville and Memphis, as well as bringing tourists in because of Graceland and so forth.
Still coming.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I've had a chance to meet many of them who have flown in while we were there, because our younger daughter lives in Colliersville.
Oh, okay.
And so I was here in school, and Dad called and he said, I think you might want to come up to the Capitol tomorrow. And he said, in fact, come on in tonight and then we'll go up together. And I said, okay, but why? And he says, well, somebody's coming in that you might want to meet. I said, okay. So I checked out, drove home.
So you didn't know who until you got to Nashville?
Oh, yeah, he told me.
Oh, he did, okay.
He told me, but I was not permitted to say.
Oh, I understand.
So I, you know. And so we get in the car, drive up to the Capitol, and in the way that the Capitol, the governor's office was laid out at that time, Dad had his conference room to the right of his office. And there's an access door to the outside of the Capitol there. And the Jordanaires and their wives were all seated around the board table. And there was an empty chair up where I was sitting, and there was an empty chair at the other end. And Hoyt Hawkins, who was with the Jordanaires, he started elaborating on how to create publicity, as if we needed any. And he says, now, what we're going to do is, because the lobby and the reception room were absolutely jammed with press people, newspapers, photographers, you name it. He says, when he comes in this side door, I'm going to open up the door to the reception room, and then you stand up and swoon. And Dad looked at him and he says, I don't think so. And so that idea went down the tubes, but everybody got a big kick out of it.
I'm sure they did.
And about that time, the outside door opened, and there he stood in this black kind of silk shark skin suit, you know. It was like somebody had sucked the air out of the room.
How bad?
I mean, dead silence. Nothing was heard. And he's just standing there like that with Joe Esposito and Alan Fortis right behind him that had driven up with him. And so he sits down at the far end, and they all talk with the Jordanaires and everything. And the sergeant of arms calls and says it's time for our guest to come up. So by that, he gets up and walks all the way around and comes and sits down at a chair that was empty next to me. And I said, okay, you know. And he, you know, where are you in school, and how did you get out of school to come up here and do this? And we're just chit-chatting and all. And so Dad gets up, and Elvis gets up, and so he grabs my hand, and he says, let's go. And I said, I'm not going. I said, there's no chair for me in the house. And he says, Governor, can she go? And what's Dad gonna say?
Oh, sure.
You know. And so Dad said, okay. Well, by that time I saw the sergeant of arms dash out and to get another chair up there real quick. And so anyway, here we go with all this long entourage, and Elvis and I'm being pulled like this, you know. We get in there. Well, the noise was just deafening. Everybody was screaming, you know, but it was quite a performance, you know, even though he didn't get to sing. The colonel would not permit him to sing. But it was exciting. And then after we got through with that and back down into the office, then he had requested to go out and meet Johnny Bragg, who was the leader of the Prisonaires, a singing group. Dad had arranged so that he could go out there to the prison. And so he turned around and he said, Governor, can Ann go with us? And we get that all settled out. And I've got pictures of us leaving, getting in his Rolls Royce to drive out to the prison that's a real contrast.
With the police escort.
Oh, of course, yes. And so we get out there, and the warden comes flying down the steps, and apparently they had already called ahead that I was with them. And he gets there, and they roll the window down, and he says, "Miss Ann, you know you can't come inside." And I said, "Why? I've been inside before." And he said, "We can't take care of both you and Elvis." And I said, "Okay." So then Joe and Ellen had to flip coins to decide which one was going to sit with me in the car while he went in.
Yeah.
So, and then that starts that relationship.
So you didn't get to go in to the prison?
I did not get to go in, but he had a good visit with Johnny.
I understand that you also attended some recording sessions with Elvis
I
and
did.
other
Yes.
events?
In fact, a week and a half after that, he came into town, and they snuck me in, and that was one of the things that when our relationship started developing, that Dad and Elvis were very strong about, was to protect my privacy as much as possible. So very few people even knew that I dated him for as long as I did.
Okay.
And went to LA, and he came here, and I told Mrs. Haslam she needed to put a sign up on the master bedroom up on the second floor and say, "Elvis slept here."
That's what it should
And
be.
she got a big kick out
I
of
bet
that.
you did. John, tell me your fondest experience and memory of being the son of Governor Buford Ellington. Any particular thing stand out?
Well,
I know you were removed from a lot of this. until the
yeah,
service.
yeah, I really was, and even going back to high school days and working up to when Dad first started getting involved in politics, he was with the Farm Bureau, and which meant he traveled. He traveled the entire state of Tennessee at the time. That so he was gone a lot, and we were out there on the farm, and we had a farm.
That was in Marshall County, right?
Marshall County, a big town of Verona, Tennessee.
Absolutely.
And so I was working on the farm, going to high school, and then came over here, and that's when Dad had started getting involved in politics. He got to know Joel Evans. I don't know how that relationship ever came to, but he did, and Joel Evans was, I believe, a U.S. congressman at the time.
Right,
Yes.
and served this community.
That's
this
right.
district,
He
uh-huh.
served this area.
Yeah.
So that's how he got started. But once that started, boy, he was gone.
I'll bet.
And I'm talking about within the state of Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, I
you know,
understand.
but he had gotten to do real well with the Farm Bureau, and it was and that was when they were getting into the insurance business, Farm Bureau insurance, and the farmers were very receptive to Dad and the fact that he had been a farmer and he knew what he was talking about and all this kind of thing. And then later on, going back to the first Clement administration, Frank had appointed him as Secretary of Agriculture or Director, whatever the title is.
Commissioner, I think.
Commissioner of Agriculture, that's right. Commissioner of Agriculture. So it went on there. But to sort of answer your question, we didn't spend a lot of time together just because the only thing I can remember him saying is when I got out of college, he said, "Well, what are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to stay in aviation." He said, "Well, I've never met an old pilot." And so I said, "Well, I hope I can break that for you a little bit there."
Wonderful lives for the two of you and wonderful traditions that you tell us about. And we just thank you so much for being with us on Murfreesboro Storytellers.
Yeah, well, thank you for having us.
And Ellington Wagner and John Earl Ellington for Murfreesboro Storytellers. Thank you for joining us.